power isn't always worn like a suit and tie, announced in press conferences, or wielded from a corner office overlooking the city. Sometimes, true power is quiet, nurtured in a community garden, held in the calloused, gentle hands of an 80-year-old woman. What happens when that quiet strength is mocked by the very people sworn to protect it? Two police officers thought they were just having a laugh at the expense of a frail, elderly black woman after a minor fender bender. They saw her as invisible, a nobody. They couldn't have known they were writing the final chapter of their careers because they had no idea who her son was. The afternoon sun of mid-September was warm on Mina Vance's back. At 80, she moved with a deliberate, graceful slowness that belied the strength in her hands. Those hands, wrinkled and mapped with the lines of a long life, were currently tending to the prize-winning roses in the Oakmont Community Garden, a vibrant patch of green she had personally championed for the last 2 decades. The garden was her sanctuary, a place of quiet communion with the earth, a stark contrast to the concrete and sirens of the city that sprawled around it. Today, the scent of lavender and damp soil filled the air, a perfume of peace. Mina had finished her weeding and was packing her small trowel and gloves into a canvas bag. Her 2008 Buick Lucerne, a car as steadfast and reliable as she was parked just down the street. It was a humble vehicle, but it was paid for, and it got her to the garden, to the grocery store, and to the church, where she still volunteered every Sunday. It was all she needed. She eased herself into the driver's seat, her joints protesting with a familiar ache, and started the engine. Pulling away from the curb, she signaled and checked her mirrors, her movements practiced and careful. She was only 3 blocks from her small but immaculate home on Sycamore Street when it happened. A sleek, new-model SUV, speeding down a side street, blew through a stop sign. Mina's foot instinctively slammed on the brake. The tires of her Buick screeched, but it was too late. The SUV clipped her front bumper with a sickening crunch of metal and plastic. Her head snapped forward, and the seatbelt bit sharply into her shoulder. For a moment, the world was a jumble of sound and shock. A young man, no older than 25, with a backwards baseball cap and an expression of pure panic, jumped out of the SUV. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was on my phone. I didn't even see the sign," he stammered, his words tumbling out. Mina, though shaken, unbuckled her seatbelt and slowly opened her door. "It's all right, young man. The important thing is, are you hurt?" No, I'm fine. Your car," he said, gesturing to the crumpled bumper and shattered headlight of her Buick. His own vehicle had barely a scratch. Within minutes, the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser painted the street. 2 white officers emerged. The older of the two, with a thick mustache and a world-weary slump to his shoulders, was Officer Rick Miller. His partner, younger and with a nervous energy about him, was Officer Ben Davis. Miller's eyes swept over the scene, lingering on Mina's old car, her simple cotton dress, and her dark skin. He then glanced at the young, white driver of the expensive SUV. An entire narrative seemed to form in his head before a single question was asked. "All right, what happened here?" Miller asked, his tone already dripping with bored impatience. The young man, visibly relieved at the police presence, immediately began explaining, "It was my fault, officer. I ran the stop sign. I was looking at my phone. I told her, it's all on me." Mina simply nodded. "That's what happened." He admitted it. Officer Miller ignored her, keeping his focus on the young man. "You were on your phone, huh? Let's see your license and registration." As the young man complied, Miller leaned in conspiratorially. "Don't you worry, son. We'll get this sorted out." He then turned to Mina, his gaze dismissive. "Mom, I need your license and registration." Mina retrieved them from her glove compartment and handed them over. Miller took them, his fingers brushing against hers with a hint of disdain. He glanced at the address. Sycamore Street. Figures. He and Davis walked back to their cruiser. Through the open window, Mina could hear snippets of their conversation. Davis's voice was low, but Miller's was a confident, condescending murmur. She saw him gesture toward her, then toward the young man, and then he let out a short, barking laugh. When they returned, Miller's whole demeanor had changed. He handed the young man his documents back. "Okay, we've got your statement." He then turned to Mina, a smirk playing on his lips. "Ma'am, according to my assessment of the scene, it looks like you pulled out in front of him. Failure to yield." Mina's mouth fell open. "What?" "But he ran the stop sign. He told you he ran the stop sign." The young driver looked utterly bewildered. "Wait, what? I just said it was my fault." Miller held up a hand, silencing him. "Son, you were shaken up. It's common for people to misremember things in the heat of the moment. The damage to her vehicle is on the front corner, consistent with her pulling into your path of travel. But there's a stop sign right there," Mina protested, her voice trembling with indignation. "He went right through it." Officer Miller let out another chuckle. This time it was louder, crueler. Officer Davis shifted on his feet, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. "A stop sign," Miller said, as if the words were a foreign concept. He looked at Mina, his eyes filled with a patronizing amusement. "Listen, Grandma, why don't you let us handle this? We know what we're doing." He began writing in his notepad. "I'm going to have to issue you a citation." Tears of frustration and humiliation welled in Mina's eyes. It wasn't about the ticket or the car. It was the laughter. It was the casual, brutal dismissal of her word, of her very presence. She felt herself shrink under their gaze, reduced from a person to a stereotype, a problem to be managed. "This is not right," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Miller tore the ticket from his pad and held it out to her. "Life's not always fair," he said with a wink. "Now you have a good day." He and Davis sauntered back to their car, their laughter echoing in the quiet street long after their cruiser had turned the corner, leaving Mina Vance standing alone beside her broken car, the flimsy paper of the citation trembling in her hand. The drive home was a blur. Mina's hands shook so violently she had to grip the steering wheel until her knuckles were white. The grinding sound from the damaged wheel well was a constant, grating reminder of the injustice she had just suffered. When she finally pulled into her driveway, she sat in the car for a long time, the engine off, the silence of her garage amplifying the roaring in her ears. Humiliation was a hot, bitter taste in her mouth. She had lived through the civil rights movement. She had seen real, overt hatred. She had been called names that would make a sailor blush and had doors slammed in her face because of the color of her skin. But this was different. This was the casual, insidious poison of being deemed irrelevant. Miller's laughter was worse than a slur. It implied she wasn't even worth the effort of hating. She was just a joke. Her first instinct was to call her son, Marcus. Marcus would fix this. Marcus would rain fire down on that police department. He was the mayor, after all. A single phone call from him, and Officers Miller and Davis would find themselves in a world of trouble. The thought brought a brief, sharp flash of satisfaction. She reached for her purse, her fingers hovering over the worn leather of her cell phone case. But then she stopped. What would she say? "Marcus, a mean policeman was mean to your mother?" He was running a city of 2 million people. He was dealing with union negotiations, budget crises, and infrastructure projects that cost billions. her fender bender, her wounded pride. It felt so small in comparison. For 40 years since his father passed, she had prided herself on her independence. She had raised him to be strong, to stand on his own 2 feet, and she had tried to live by that same principle. Calling him felt like a weakness, like she was using his position as a shield. He had enough battles to fight without having to worry about his old mother. No, she would handle this herself. She was Mina Vance. She had faced down hospital administrators and stubborn city council members to get that community garden built. She could handle 2 arrogant patrolmen. The next morning, with a renewed sense of resolve, she called the Oakmont Police Department's non-emergency line. After navigating a labyrinthine automated menu, she was finally connected to a desk sergeant who sounded as if he were being paid by the yawn. She explained the situation calmly and clearly, recounting the events, the young man's admission of fault, and the officer's dismissive behavior. "And the officers' names were?" the sergeant asked, his voice flat. "Miller and Davis," she said. "Officer Rick Miller was the one who wrote the ticket." There was a pause, followed by the sound of typing. "I see a report filed by Officer Miller for a traffic accident at that location. It matches the citation issued to you." "Yes, but the report is wrong," Mina insisted. "He falsified it. He laughed at me." "Ma'am, if you wish to contest the citation, you can do so at your court date," the sergeant droned. "If you wish to file a complaint against an officer, you need to come down to the 12th precinct and fill out a civilian complaint form in person." "The 12th precinct? That's all the way across town," Mina said. "It would take 2 bus transfers and nearly an hour and a half to get there." "That's the procedure," he said, the finality in his voice like a slamming door. He offered no further help, no sympathy, no alternative, just the cold, hard wall of bureaucracy. Mina hung up, feeling a fresh wave of despair. The system wasn't just indifferent, it was designed to be difficult. It was designed to make people like her give up. Meanwhile, in a small apartment overlooking a busy street, a young graphic designer named Maria Sanchez was stewing. She had been watering the plants on her balcony when she witnessed the entire encounter. She had seen the SUV run the stop sign. She had heard the young man admit fault. And she had seen the 2 officers laugh as they belittled the elderly woman. It had made her blood boil. She didn't know the woman, but she knew injustice when she saw it. She had tried to go down and say something, but by the time she got downstairs, the police were gone and the old woman was driving away. But Maria had her phone. She had recorded a 30-second clip of the officers laughing with their backs to the woman before they drove off. It wasn't much, but it was something. Unbeknownst to Mina, Maria Sanchez was doing what she would not. She wasn't just stewing, she was acting. She looked up the number for the mayor's office. She wasn't naive enough to think she could speak to him directly, but there was an office for constituent services. She would leave a message. She would describe every detail. She would be a witness, even if no one had asked her to be. Her call wouldn't get through to a person, of course. It would go to a voicemail box, a digital repository for the city's countless complaints and concerns. But Maria left her message anyway, her voice clear and angry, a small electronic seed of rebellion planted in the heart of City Hall. Mayor Marcus Vance sat at the head of a gleaming mahogany table in the City Hall conference room. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and ambition. He was flanked by his chief of staff, the city planner, and a team of developers who were pitching a massive waterfront revitalization project. Renderings of futuristic glass towers and pristine parks were spread across the table. This was Marcus's world, a world of billion-dollar budgets, long-term strategy, and carefully calibrated political maneuvering. He was known for his calm, almost unnervingly composed demeanor. At 45, he was the youngest mayor in Oakmont's history, a charismatic and sharp-witted leader who had risen to power on a platform of police reform and community investment. He was polished, articulate, and fiercely intelligent. His assistant, a young, hyper-efficient woman named Amelia, slipped into the room and quietly placed a tablet in front of him. On the screen was a transcript of a voicemail, flagged with a red, urgent tag. Normally he would wave it away. He had a specific protocol for constituent complaints. They were routed through the proper channels, but Amelia knew him well enough to know which messages required his immediate attention. The subject line read, "Police misconduct complaint. Witness report." He held up a hand, pausing the developer mid-sentence. "One moment, gentlemen." His eyes scanned the transcript. Caller: Maria Sanchez. Ray. Traffic incident. Corner of Chestnut and 3rd. Set tunnel 15, approx. 3:45 p.m. Officers Miller and Davis, 12th Precinct. Witnessed officers falsify report against elderly African-American woman. Vehicle: older model Buick. Victim of accident caused by another driver who admitted fault. Officers were condescending, dismissive. They laughed at her. I have a short video of their behavior. This was a disgusting abuse of power. Marcus felt a familiar knot of frustration tighten in his chest. Another complaint against Miller. The name was notorious. He had a file, thick with similar accusations, that the police union had managed to stonewall at every turn. But as he continued reading, a cold dread began to seep into his veins, starting in his stomach and spreading outwards until it reached his fingertips. Elderly African-American woman. Older model Buick. Corner of Chestnut and 3rd. That was 2 blocks from the community garden. His mother's garden. His mother drove a 2008 Buick Lucerne. He pictured her, tending her roses, her hands covered in dirt. A wave of nausea washed over him. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence. There were thousands of elderly black women in Oakmont, but the details were too specific. The location, the car, the quiet dignity the caller described in the woman. He knew that dignity. He had been raised by it. The professional mask he wore every day began to crack. The city planner, the developers, the billion-dollar project on the table. They all faded into a dull, distant roar. In his mind, he saw his mother, standing alone on a street corner, being laughed at. His mother, who had worked double shifts as a nurse to put him through law school. His mother, who had faced down racism her whole life with a spine of steel and an unshakable faith. The thought of anyone, let alone 2 uniformed officers of his own city, mocking her, it ignited a rage so pure and so hot it nearly took his breath away. He stood up abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping against the polished floor. The room fell silent. "Amelia," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, all its usual warmth gone, replaced by something cold and sharp. "Cancel the rest of my afternoon." "Mr. Mayor?" his chief of staff asked, concerned. "Is everything all right?" Marcus didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on the transcript on the tablet, but he wasn't seeing the words anymore. He was seeing his mother's face. "Get me Police Chief Peterson on the line. Now." He walked out of the conference room without another word, leaving a wake of confused and intimidated city officials behind him. In the hallway, Amelia was already on the phone. As he strode toward his private office, the carefully constructed wall between Marcus Vance, the mayor, and Marcus Vance, the son, crumbled into dust, and what was left was a man consumed by a singular, ice-cold purpose. Someone had hurt his mother, and he was about to make them pay. Police Chief Frank Peterson was a man who understood the delicate dance of politics. A 30-year veteran of the force, he had seen mayors come and go. He'd learned to navigate their pet projects and their public outrage with a placid, non-committal competence. When his private line buzzed and his secretary announced it was Mayor Vance, he leaned back in his leather chair, expecting a call about the upcoming union negotiations. "Frank," the mayor's voice came through the speaker, devoid of any preamble or pleasantry. "An incident occurred yesterday, approximately 3:45 p.m., corner of Chestnut and 3rd. A traffic accident involving 2 patrolmen from the 12th, officers Rick Miller and Ben Davis." Peterson's eyes narrowed slightly. Miller? Of course it was Miller. The man was a lawsuit waiting to happen. "I can look into it, Mr. Mayor. Do you have a complaint number?" "Forget the complaint number," Marcus snapped, his voice like the crack of a whip. "I have a witness report stating your officers fabricated an accident report, issued a wrongful citation to an elderly woman, and behaved in a manner I can only describe as unprofessional and contemptible. I want the incident report, the citation copy, and the body cam footage from both officers on my desk within the hour. I also want their complete personnel files, including every single complaint, substantiated or not, ever filed against them." The sheer force and specificity of the demand caught Peterson off guard. This was not the usual political grandstanding. This was personal. "Marcus, I can get you the report, but the body cam footage and personnel files, there are protocols," Peterson began, falling back on procedure. "Union rules." "Frank," Marcus interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "This is not a request. I am the mayor of this city, and this is an official inquiry into a potential gross miscarriage of justice by members of the OPD. If those files and that footage are not on my secure server in 60 minutes, our next conversation will be with the city attorney and the press present. Do you understand me?" Peterson sat bolt upright. The message was clear. The political dance was over. "Understood, Mr. Mayor. I'll have it sent over immediately." He hung up the phone, a knot of unease twisting in his gut. He yelled for his aide. "Get me everything we have on a traffic incident yesterday at Chestnut and 3rd, Miller and Davis. And I mean everything. Body cam, priors, the works. The mayor's office wants it. Now." Down at the 12th precinct, officers Miller and Davis were finishing up their shift, trading jokes by the coffee machine. Their sergeant approached them, a grim look on his face. "Miller. Davis. My office." Inside the small, cluttered room, the sergeant tossed a memo onto his desk. "Call just came down from the chief's office. They're pulling your report and body cam from that fender bender yesterday. The one with the old lady." Miller scoffed, leaning back in his chair with an air of untouchable arrogance. "Seriously? For that? What did she do? Write a letter?" "I don't know what she did," the sergeant said, his eyes hard. "But the order came through the mayor's office. They want your entire jackets, too." Davis paled slightly. The mayor's office? Over a traffic ticket? Why would the mayor care about a routine traffic stop? "I'm sure it's nothing," Miller said, waving a dismissive hand, though a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He hated paperwork and he hated inquiries. They were a waste of his time. Some bleeding heart constituent probably called in. The mayor has to look like he's doing something. It'll blow over in a day. "You better hope it does," the sergeant warned, "because I've seen nothing turn into a full-blown internal affairs investigation before. Just make sure your story is straight." "Our story is straight," Miller said, his voice full of bravado. She pulled out. End of story. The report reflects that. As they walked out of the sergeant's office, Davis couldn't shake a feeling of dread. He remembered the old woman's eyes, the quiet way she'd stood there, absorbing their mockery. He remembered Miller's easy, cruel laughter. At the time, he'd been swept up in his partner's bravado, the toxic camaraderie of the patrol car. Now, in the harsh, fluorescent light of the precinct, it felt different. It felt cheap and wrong. "You don't think this could be a problem, do you, Rick?" Davis asked, his voice low. Miller clapped him hard on the shoulder. "Relax, kid. Who are they gonna believe? Us, 2 decorated police officers? Or some old woman from the sticks who can't even drive her junk heap straight? Trust me," he said with a grin. "We're untouchable." But as the digital files were being uploaded from the precinct server to the chief's office, and from there to the encrypted network of the mayor, the cogs of a machine far larger and more powerful than Officer Miller could comprehend were beginning to turn. And they were turning against him. Marcus Vance didn't go home. He went to the one place in the city that had always been his anchor, the small, tidy house on Sycamore Street. He found his mother in the backyard, sitting in her favorite wicker chair, a cup of chamomile tea steaming on the small table beside her. She was staring at her prize-winning roses, but her eyes weren't really seeing them. There were new, tired lines etched around her mouth that hadn't been there 2 days ago. "Mama," he said softly. Mina started, turning to him with a weary smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Marcus? What a surprise. I didn't expect you." He sat down in the chair opposite her. He didn't ask about her day. He didn't talk about his. He simply reached out and took her hand. "Tell me what happened, Mama." Her smile faltered. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, might brush it off as nothing. But something in her son's gaze, a deep, knowing sadness, made the pretense crumble. The dam of her composure broke, and the story spilled out. Not just the facts of the accident, but the feeling of it all. The condescension in Officer Miller's voice, the way he'd called her Grandma, the sting of their laughter. "It wasn't the ticket, Marcus," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "It was the way they looked at me. Like I was nothing, a piece of dust to be brushed aside. I felt so foolish." Marcus squeezed her hand, his own heart aching with a mixture of sorrow and a white-hot, protective rage. "You are not foolish. You are the strongest person I know. They are the fools." He stayed with her for another hour, just talking, letting her voice all the hurt and frustration she had tried to suppress. When he finally left, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The cold resolve he'd felt in his office had now been forged into something harder, something unbreakable. Back at City Hall, in the solitude of his office, he opened the secure files sent by Chief Peterson. First, he read the incident report. It was a masterpiece of subtle fabrication. Miller had written it to sound perfectly plausible, describing Mina's car emerging from the curb without yielding, and the other driver taking evasive action. The young man's on-scene confession was completely omitted. Then, Marcus opened the bodycam files. The first video was from Officer Davis's camera. The angle was slightly off, mostly showing Miller's back, but the audio was crystal clear. He heard the young driver's panicked admission of guilt. He heard his mother's calm, rational explanation. Then he heard Miller's condescending tone, the dismissal of the evidence right in front of him. He clicked open Miller's file. This camera was pointed directly at his mother. He saw her standing there, small and proud, her back straight even as her world was being turned upside down. He saw the smirk on Miller's face, reflected in the window of her Buick. And then he heard it. The sound that had haunted his thoughts since he first read the transcript. The laughter. It wasn't just a chuckle. It was a full-throated, belittling cackle of contempt. A sound that stripped his mother of her dignity, piece by piece. He watched as Miller handed her the ticket with that smug wink. He saw the hurt in his mother's eyes, a deep, profound wound that no apology could ever heal. He slammed his laptop shut, a strangled cry of fury escaping his lips. He paced his office like a caged lion, the adrenaline coursing through him. For a moment, he wanted nothing more than to destroy them, to use the full, crushing weight of his office to ruin their lives, to make them feel a fraction of the humiliation his mother had felt. But he was Mayor Marcus Vance, and his rage had to be channeled. It had to be precise. It had to be surgical. He picked up his phone and dialed Chief Peterson's private number again. The chief answered on the first ring. "Did you get the files, Mr. Mayor?" Peterson asked, his voice wary. "I did, Frank," Marcus said, his voice eerily calm. "I watched the footage. I saw your officer, Rick Miller, falsify a report, intimidate a witness into silence, and mock an 80-year-old citizen of this city. I have a few questions for you, but before I ask them, there is something you need to know, something that provides a bit of context." There was a pause. Marcus let the silence hang in the air, heavy and menacing. "The elderly woman in that video," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, each word sharpened to a razor's edge. "The woman he called Grandma and laughed at. Her name is Mina Vance." He paused again, letting the name sink in. "She's my mother." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Marcus could picture Chief Peterson in his office, his face ashen, the political calculations in his head spinning into a frantic, chaotic blur. He had not just allowed his officers to harass a citizen, he had allowed them to harass the mother of the most powerful man in the city. The game had just changed, and Peterson knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was already on the losing side. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound on the phone line was the faint hum of an electrical connection. Chief Peterson finally found his voice, but it was strained, a pale imitation of his usual gruff confidence. "Mr. Mayor, Marcus, I had no idea." "Why would you, Frank?" Marcus replied, his voice still dangerously level. "She was just another anonymous black woman in an old car. Not worth a second thought, right? That's the core of the problem, isn't it?" "I'll open an internal affairs investigation immediately," Peterson stammered, scrambling for purchase. "I'll assign my best people. They'll be thorough, I promise you." "Your best people won't be good enough," Marcus said coldly. "This isn't going to be a standard IA review that gets buried in 6 months. This is going to be a full-spectrum, top-down investigation, and it starts now. I want Miller and Davis on administrative leave. Effective immediately. Not desk duty. Leave. They are not to set foot in a city building or vehicle. Is that understood?" "Yes, Mr. Mayor. Of course." "And Frank," Marcus added, his voice a sliver of ice, "don't call me Marcus. From now on, you'll address me as Mayor Vance. I suspect we'll be having many more professional conversations in the coming days." He ended the call without waiting for a reply. The shockwave from that phone call hit the 12th precinct like a thunderclap. Within the hour, the precinct captain, his face a mask of grim fury, called Miller and Davis into his office. "I just got a call from the chief himself," the captain barked, not even telling them to sit. "You two are on administrative leave, effective immediately. Hand over your badges and your service weapons." Miller's jaw dropped. The smug confidence he'd worn like a second skin evaporated, replaced by a stunned disbelief. "What? On leave? For what? That traffic stop?" "I wasn't given details," the captain lied, trying to contain the situation. "All I know is the order came from the very top. So hand them over. Now." Davis, shaking, unclipped his badge and placed it on the desk. He then unholstered his weapon with trembling hands. He felt sick to his stomach. This was not blowing over. Miller, however, was defiant. "This is bull. It's because of that old woman, isn't it? She knows somebody, is that it? The union will hear about this." "You can call your union rep from home," the captain said, his patience gone. "Now get out of my precinct." Stripped of their authority, Miller and Davis walked out of the station in a daze. The other officers watched them go, some with curiosity, others with a palpable sense of schadenfreude. Miller's reputation as a bully had won him few friends. The next morning, 2 detectives from the Internal Affairs Division arrived at the 12th precinct. They weren't just any IA cops. They were Detective Harding, a stoic, meticulous veteran with a reputation for being unshakable, and Detective Chen, a younger, tech-savvy investigator, known for her ability to find digital breadcrumbs nobody else could. They were the team Peterson sent in when he was truly terrified. They sealed off Miller and Davis's lockers and impounded the computer in their patrol car. They began by interviewing the young driver of the SUV, a man named Kevin Riley. Away from Miller's intimidating presence, Riley was eager to set the record straight. "I told him it was my fault," Riley said, his voice earnest. "I must have said it 3 or 4 times. I was on my phone, I blew the stop sign, I hit her. But the older cop, Miller, he just ignored me. He basically told me to shut up and that he'd handle it. He made it seem like he was doing me a favor. It felt really weird, really wrong." Next, Harding and Chen interviewed Miller and Davis separately in sterile, windowless interrogation rooms. Davis crumbled almost immediately. Faced with 2 stone-faced detectives and the threat of losing his job and pension, his loyalty to Miller disintegrated. He recounted the events, admitting they had ignored Riley's confession and that Miller had decided to ticket Mina Vance based on what Davis called a gut feeling. "Did you laugh at Mrs. Vance?" Detective Chen asked, her gaze unwavering. Davis flushed with shame. "Miller. He made a crack about her being a bad driver. I might have chuckled. It was unprofessional. I know that." Miller's interview was a different story. He was pure bluster and indignation. "This is a joke," he snarled, leaning back in his chair. "I made a judgment call based on 20 years of experience. The damage on the vehicles indicated she was at fault. The kid was just scared and trying to be a nice guy." "So you're saying the sworn statement from Mr. Riley, claiming he admitted fault to you on the scene, is a lie?" Harding asked, his voice flat. "He was confused," Miller insisted, "and the body cam audio, which clearly records him saying, 'It was my fault, officer,' is—" "What? A deepfake?" Chen added, a hint of sarcasm in her tone. Miller's face tightened. He hadn't counted on them scrutinizing the evidence so closely. "Look, things happen fast on the street. You make a call. You also made a call to laugh at an 80-year-old woman you were wrongfully citing," Harding stated, sliding a photo of Mina across the table. "Look at this woman, Officer Miller. Does she look like a threat to you?" For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear entered Miller's eyes. This was not a routine slap on the wrist. This was an unraveling. The detectives had the witness, they had the body cam footage, and they had his terrified partner singing like a canary in the next room. His carefully constructed wall of arrogance and denial was beginning to show cracks. And through those cracks, he could see his entire career starting to fall apart. Detectives Harding and Chen were like dogs with a bone. The directive from Chief Peterson had been simple and laced with panic. Leave no stone unturned. They took that directive to heart. The investigation into the traffic incident on Chestnut Street quickly expanded into a full-scale audit of Officer Rick Miller's entire career. They started with his personnel file, a document thick enough to stop a door. It was a testament to a broken system. Over his 20 years on the force, Miller had accumulated 17 civilian complaints. They ranged from excessive force during an arrest to verbal abuse during traffic stops. The accusers were disproportionately minorities from low-income neighborhoods. And in every single case, the outcome was the same. Complaint not sustained. Miller had been protected by a combination of a powerful police union, a blue wall of silence, where fellow officers were reluctant to testify against one another, and an internal affairs division that, until now, had lacked the political will to truly hold him accountable. Chen, the digital forensics expert, began a deep dive into Miller's patrol car's computer records and his official communications. She discovered a disturbing pattern. Miller consistently issued more citations and made more arrests in minority communities compared to his peers patrolling similar beats. His reports often contained subjective, dismissive language when describing minority individuals. He would use phrases like, "subject was belligerent," or "individual became argumentative," in situations where body cam footage, when it was available and hadn't been accidentally corrupted, showed a completely different story. Meanwhile, Harding did old-fashioned police work. He started tracking down the people who had filed those 17 complaints. Most were hesitant to talk, their past experiences leaving them with a deep-seated distrust of the police. But Harding was persistent, and for the first time, these individuals felt like someone was actually listening. He spoke to a Mr. Henderson, a black man who had been ticketed by Miller for a broken tail light that miraculously worked perfectly when he took his car to a mechanic the next day. He interviewed a young Latina woman who Miller had threatened with arrest for loitering while she was waiting for a bus. The most damning interview came from a retired officer, a man named O'Malley, who had been Miller's partner for a year before requesting a transfer. "Rick was a bully with a badge," O'Malley told Harding, sitting in his quiet suburban living room. "He saw the world in black and white, and I don't mean right and wrong. He judged people the second he saw them. If you lived in a certain neighborhood or looked a certain way, you were guilty until proven innocent in his eyes. I couldn't work with him. It was poison." With a sworn statement from a former partner, the case against Miller became ironclad. It was no longer about a single botched traffic stop. It was about a career built on prejudice and abuse of power. Davis, by extension, was guilty of complicity, of standing by and allowing it to happen, time and time again. The final piece of the puzzle came from the witness Mayor Vance's office had identified, Maria Sanchez. Harding and Chen met with her in her apartment. She played them the 30-second video she had recorded from her balcony. It showed Miller and Davis walking back to their cruiser, looking back at Mina, and then Miller erupting in laughter while Davis smirked. The visual evidence was visceral and damning. The detectives compiled their findings into a comprehensive 100-page report. It detailed not only the events of Mina Vance's traffic stop, but also a career's worth of misconduct by Miller, enabled by Davis's silence and a system's indifference. They submitted it to Chief Peterson and, per the mayor's instructions, to the office of the district attorney, Sarah Jenkins. D.A. Jenkins, a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor and a political ally of Mayor Vance, read the report with a growing sense of outrage. The initial incident was bad enough, but the pattern of behavior was a ticking time bomb that the city had ignored for 2 decades. She called Mayor Vance. "Marcus, I've read the IA report on Miller and Davis. This is beyond just firing them. The report from the Vance incident, that's felony falsifying a government document. And based on the other complaints, there's a clear pattern of civil rights violations. We're opening a criminal investigation. I'm taking this to a grand jury." The walls weren't just closing in on Rick Miller anymore. They were collapsing. He had thought his badge made him untouchable. He was about to find out that it had only made him a bigger target. His laughter on that quiet street corner had become an echo, bouncing off the walls of power, and it was coming back to him as the roar of a tidal wave. The story was too big to contain. A week after the investigation began, a source inside the police department leaked the basic details to a reporter at the Oakmont Chronicle. 2 officers suspended pending an IA investigation initiated by the mayor's office over their treatment of an elderly woman. The spark hit the dry tinder of public opinion and exploded into a wildfire. The media descended. Who was this woman? Why was the mayor so personally invested? The mayor's office was bombarded with calls. Marcus Vance knew he couldn't hide behind the curtain of bureaucracy forever. The moment required leadership, not just retribution. It was time to control the narrative, to use this ugly incident as a catalyst for the very reforms he had promised to champion. He called a press conference in the grand press room at City Hall. It was packed. Every local news station was there, along with national reporters who had caught wind of a major police scandal. The room was buzzing with anticipation. Chief Peterson and District Attorney Sarah Jenkins stood behind him, their expressions grim and resolute. Marcus stepped up to the podium, the flashing of cameras reflecting in his glasses. He looked out at the sea of faces, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Good morning. I've called you here today to address the ongoing investigation into the conduct of 2 officers of the Oakmont Police Department, Officer Rick Miller and Officer Ben Davis. He laid out the facts of the case, his voice steady and measured. He described a traffic incident where the evidence was ignored, a report was falsified, and a citizen was treated with a complete and utter lack of dignity and respect. This investigation, he continued, his voice hardening, has unearthed a deeply disturbing pattern of behavior that points to systemic failures within our police department, failures that have allowed prejudice and abuse of power to fester, unchecked, for far too long. A reporter from the front row shouted a question. Mr. Mayor, sources say you have a personal connection to this case. Can you confirm the identity of the woman who was targeted by these officers? This was the moment. Marcus paused, his eyes sweeping across the room. The cameras zoomed in, waiting. The victim in this incident is an 80-year-old woman, he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal. She is a retired nurse who served this city for 40 years. She is a community leader who fought to build a garden out of a derelict lot. She is a grandmother, a church volunteer, and a taxpayer. He leaned into the microphone, his gaze intense. And yes, I do have a personal connection to her. The woman who Officer Miller and Officer Davis laughed at and humiliated is my mother, Mina Vance. A collective gasp went through the room. A frantic flurry of typing and whispered exchanges erupted. The story had just gone from a local police scandal to a national headline. Marcus held up a hand for silence. But let me be clear. This is not about my mother. My mother is a strong, proud woman who has endured far worse in her life than the petty cruelty of 2 bitter men. She will be fine. This is about every citizen in Oakmont who has ever been dismissed, disrespected, or abused by those in power. This is about every person whose complaint was never sustained. This is about a culture that we must change. He then laid out his plan. He announced the immediate formation of a new civilian oversight board with full subpoena power to investigate police misconduct. He declared a zero-tolerance policy for falsifying reports, making it an automatic firing offense. He announced a partnership with the DA's office to audit thousands of past cases handled by officers with a history of sustained complaints. The actions of these two officers were not just an insult to my mother, he concluded, his voice ringing with conviction. They were an insult to the badge. They were an insult to every good and decent officer who serves this city with honor, and they were an insult to the people of Oakmont. Today, that insult is answered. We will do better. We will be better. The era of impunity is over. He stepped back from the podium, his face a mask of determination. He had taken his personal pain and rage and transformed it into a political weapon aimed at the heart of the system that had caused it. It was no longer just karma for two rogue cops. It was a reckoning for the entire city. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The grand jury, presented with the mountain of evidence from IA and the DA's office, handed down indictments. Officer Rick Miller was fired from the Oakmont Police Department and faced criminal charges for falsifying a government document, perjury, and multiple civil rights violations. His 20-year career ended not with a pension, but with a mug shot and a court date. Officer Ben Davis, facing similar charges, accepted a plea deal. In exchange for his testimony against Miller, the criminal charges were reduced. He was also fired, his career in law enforcement over forever. He left the city in disgrace, a young man whose moral cowardice had cost him everything. A few weeks later, on a cool autumn afternoon, a car pulled up outside Mina Vance's house. It was Ben Davis. He approached her as she was watering her front porch petunias, his head bowed, his face pale and drawn. "Mrs. Vance?" he began, his voice barely a whisper. I just wanted to apologize. What we did was wrong. There's no excuse for it. I stood by, and I let it happen. I'm so sorry." Mina looked at him, her gaze not angry, but filled with a deep, weary sadness. She saw not a monster, but a weak young man who had followed the path of least resistance. "Apologies are words, Mr. Davis," she said quietly. "What matters is what you do now. You have a long life ahead of you. Learn from this. Be a better man than you were that day." She did not offer forgiveness, but she did not offer condemnation either. She simply offered the truth, then turned and went back inside her house, leaving him to grapple with his own conscience. The reforms Mayor Marcus Vance had announced were not just talk. The Civilian Oversight Board was established, with Maria Sanchez, the woman who had made the initial call, appointed as one of its first members. The board immediately began reviewing cases, and for the first time, citizens felt they had a voice that could not be silenced by an internal police review. The story of Mina Vance became a local legend, a symbol of quiet dignity prevailing over arrogant power. Community groups rallied around her, and the Oakmont Community Garden was officially renamed the Mina Vance Garden for Peace, with a new plaque dedicated in her honor. One sunny Saturday, months after the press conference, Marcus cleared his schedule of all mayoral duties. He drove to his mother's house, not in his official city car, but in his own private vehicle. He found her where he always knew he would, in her garden, kneeling in the dirt, tending to a new bed of tulips. He knelt beside her, the knees of his expensive trousers sinking into the soft soil. For a long while, they worked in comfortable silence, pulling weeds, turning the earth. The air was filled with the scent of life and growth. "Did I do the right thing, Mama?" Marcus asked finally, his voice quiet. Mina paused, looking up from a stubborn root. She looked at her son, not the mayor, but the boy she had raised. She saw the weight he carried on his shoulders. "You used your power for good, Marcus," she said, her voice firm. "You didn't do it for me. You did it for the Mr. Hendersons and all the others who didn't have a son in the mayor's office. You turned something ugly into something that will help people for years to come. That's more than just the right thing. It's your legacy." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that erased all the tired lines from her face. Marcus felt the knot of tension he'd been carrying for months finally begin to unwind. The rage had been satisfied. The injustice had been answered. What remained was this: the quiet strength of his mother, the rich smell of the earth, and the promise of a better, fairer city growing from the seeds of a single cruel afternoon. In the end, the laughter of two bitter men had faded, replaced by the enduring, hopeful silence of the garden. The story of Mina Vance serves as a powerful reminder that dignity and strength are not determined by one's station in life, but by one's character. It shows how a single act of prejudice, born from the arrogance of power, can become the very catalyst for profound and lasting change. The officers who laughed at an elderly woman never imagined their mockery would echo in the halls of power, leading not only to their own downfall, but to the reform of an entire system. They underestimated her, and in doing so, they sealed their own fate. This story is a testament to the idea that no one is invisible, and that true justice, though sometimes delayed, can be a force of nature. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of quiet strength against injustice, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Thank you for listening.